1977 Euros in Lentely, Lyon, France. This report is about the European Championship for remote-controlled car models, internationally known as RC cars, with internal combustion engines, which took place in Lentely, France, on the 13th and 14th of August 1977. The small town of Lentely is located near Lyon. Due to the fact that I was only given very incomplete information about the venue of the championship, I was only told that the event would be in Lyon on the 13th and 14th of August. When I arrived in Lyon, I had a lot of work to do before I knew where and how to get to the venue. When I finally found the site, I was quite astonished at how busy it was. The racers were still in full training mode even now in the evening. The facility, which belongs to the local club called RCCL, is beautifully laid out and so far away from the town that the engine noise can no longer disturb anyone. When it comes to engine noise, it is interesting to note how well the cars are soundproofed. I never found the noise unpleasant, even though there were always several vehicles on the track. The track was relatively bumpy on the straights, i.e. on the part of the track where you want to drive. That cost tires. As the German participant Rainer Dosch told me, up to half a centimeter in diameter per half hour of driving. Strangely enough, the tires wear was particularly bad during the training runs. It's amazing how hard the drivers chase their vehicles over the tarmac and how high the loads on these mini cars can be. Even after crashing at full speed, around 60 to 70 kilometers per hour, the journey usually continues without interruption. Nevertheless, these mini car races are also material battles, just like the real races. During such a championship, the participant takes a vehicle completely apart several times, whether to clean it, just to check it, or to replace worn parts. New gear wheels or ball bearings are needed and, of course, the tires again and again. Up to 7 drivers from each country could qualify for the Formula and Sport classes. Theoretically, 14 participants per country could take part in the championship. In practice, however, with a few exceptions, the participants take part in both classes and usually only change the bodywork from Formula to Sport. The model vehicles are on a scale of 1/8 and the bodywork must be modeled on the shape of the original bodywork.
With Udo Frank of Switzerland winning the Formula event and Per Gustafsson of Sweden taking the Sportster GT, some surprising changes of fortune amongst the recognized ace drivers of Europe could be expected. British entries could not quite make the final of Formula, but Keith Plested and Dave Martin were 3rd and 4th respectively in the semi-final runoff for the last 2 places in the final, and were ranked 7th and 8th respectively. Lineup for the Sportster GT showed a much stronger GB representation, with Keith straight through to the final in number 2 spot and Ted Longshaw heading the semi-final runoff, followed by Phil Booth at 3 and Phil Greeno at 6, making a show at a Euro event whilst still a first-year driver. Ted should perhaps have gone straight into final, since there was strong disagreement with the final heat result which displaced him, but Ted, as president of EFRA and on the jury ex officio, was in a delicate situation. He made his points very strongly but equally properly conceded to the majority jury view to uphold the otherwise excellent timekeeping team. Formula Final provided a ding-dong battle with Sabatini, Mares of Italy and Frank of Switzerland all on the same lap, until plug trouble beset the Italian and the struggle became a duet. Then Sabatini came back into the race with little chance of catching the leaders, but what a wonderful try. Driving like a madman with his minions male and female as extra marshals, he fairly howled round to achieve a thoroughly deserved 3rd place. Ron Tunn of Holland was another casualty and never really showed after an early lead, then dropping out at the halfway mark, though still placing 4th. Meanwhile, Frank held on to his lap lead to the end, with Mares hard on his tail. Only Mares and Dennis Tassos achieved double placing by making the second final for Sportster GT. Again, 2 Swiss were there, Fiocchi and Zand, with Keith Plested for GB and Per Gustafsson of Sweden. A great driver, the young Swede was tipped to me as the likely winner by Phil Greeno, and so he proved. Run clockwise, it proved a faster race as might be expected, with Sportster GT by some 7 laps. For 107 of them the race was very much between Keith and Per Gustafsson, with Keith momentarily taking over the lead at lap 90. Alas, it was not to be. The demon of fuel mixture and plugs struck, and Keith was out. Per coasted on steadily to make 124 laps, 5 ahead of second man Fiocchi of Italy. It is interesting to note that winners in each case came from drivers who had run off for a place. Did that extra run of 15 minutes prove of real value in assessing adjustments for 30-minute final? Or is this just a coincidence? The Paul Ricard circuit lies a few miles outside Lyon near the village of Lentely in a clearing of a wooded area with banked-up spectator levels on one side. Splendid drivers stand opposite with awning-covered pits alongside. Behind lie more woods, with clearings for a camping village where the Italians had a noble tented entourage, with Dutch, German and French tents and caravans of more modest style. An elegant ship's-type flag mast carried the national flags of the 14 EFRA countries. Final detail was the electronic scoreboard giving lap-by-lap figures for contestants, relayed from the ground floor of the driver's stand which housed the 6 human lap counters with their recorders. This magnificent track is a replica in miniature of the full-size racing circuit of the same name and has been achieved with the sponsorship and continuing support of the Paul Ricard company, which sells that popular French tipple anisette. Teams began to assemble at the beginning of the week, giving adequate time to learn the circuit. Everything had been laid on most efficiently with plenty of 220-volt sockets to plug in for power tools, accumulator recharging, and the like. I was told that the Italians had brought a lathe, though I did not actually see it. Although finished in a tarmac surface, the track was very bumpy with the faster cars apt to do wheelies along the straight and very wearing on tyres. Panic calls to late arrivals on the British team were made for further supplies. As time wore on, it was evident that harder and harder tyres were to be the order of the day. Heat was also a problem. Temperatures were very much of a Mediterranean order, with the ladies wearing less and less each day, though not achieving the topless condition which we enjoyed at the nearby swimming pool in Charbonnières, where some of the British were staying, others at another village just by, Dardilly. The hot weather made fuel adjustment a special anxiety. With engines running just right for 5-minute heats, they were running lean in semi-finals and finals, with frequent plug change stops, but this did not manifest itself until virtually too late to cure. But what of the opposition? All the member countries, except Ireland, put in entries, which meant nearly 100 cars to sort out with teams of 7 to be slotted in. Heats were announced early, and a trial heat with fellow competitors run before the serious business began so that drivers could get an idea of who would be balking them or not. Meanwhile, the track was open for practice with considerable interest in lap times. Early 16 seconds gave way to 15, then 14, which seemed about par for the course. To break this would give rise to a buzz along the pits. It was particularly pleasant to meet some of the entrants from countries new to the hobby but full of enthusiasm. We liked the Spanish approach, who tended towards more interesting machinery, if not the fastest prototypes, such as the 6-wheel Tyrrell. Supply position was an evident problem, heat sinks, silencers and the like being homemade rather after the American pattern, with several small stack pipes seen a year or 2 ago. They also provided a couple of the simplest starter assemblies we have seen based on X-car starter motors. One made up from a Spanish version of Dection we shall certainly copy for simplicity and ease of construction. The other was mainly wooden, folded up when not in use. Both were ground and not table fixtures. Indeed, the variety of starting arrangements provided most of the novelties and will be subject of a special feature. In the car and mechanical line, progress was very much along stereotyped lines. The mixture as before, but just that little bit better. World Champs visitors had seized upon a very useful US filler cap for pressure tanks, which allowed a large spouted filler to be inserted, did not leak, and had a large spring-loaded cap, which lifted up and down like a kettle lid when pressure got too much. Keith Plested lost his ready-made and had to knock up his own replica. Perhaps he will market a British version. The other novelty, or fad even, very noticeable, was the use of paper filters for carburetors. These are the typical concertina new Challenger design from minicars of Sweden in the autumn. With Per Gustafsson, a Euro champion, it should be popular, though not intended to be hot racing material. American kits as well as American design influence very much to the fore. After winning at Pomona, Associated again made a terrific showing at Lyons. We can hardly wait to put ours together. Rather naturally, their top car, the RC 100. 1 or 2 deltas were seen, and some marker parts, but basically Associated. The Swiss Brem cars were the most technically interesting. They are the only production kit, except Thorpe in US, still using a belt-driven racing layout. This is particularly curious since the chassis is not sprung, like a stock car model for instance, so that toothed belt drive would appear to be unnecessary. However, they are so beautifully prepared that one such car made the semi-final. Brem should certainly be given full credit as the first production car to provide disc brakes. Their version is further inboard than the PB variety and is lavishly pierced with holes. This same hole-piercing fondness will be noted on the whole of their chassis, reminiscent of a well-known Swiss cheese. I do not know actual amount of weight so saved, and whether it is worth the effort of all that drilling. Minor variations on the theme included a delta with light clear plastic shielding all round to keep the radio clean on the shaker plate. This had to be restuck down every time the body was put on, sticking in part directly to it, so that it was something of a laborious task. Another little gimmick was fixing the wing mount on one side through the silencer dustbins. Some petrol tanks seen slung behind the rear axle line to bring weight back. General bumpiness of the straight was such that some people were bringing weight forward. Phil Booth found it necessary to add over 2 ounces of dead weight to the front body fixing mount to reduce wheelies engendered by the ramp-like bumps. With his great belief in a flexible front end, this must have produced special problems for Franco Sabatini. He evidently cured them because when he was going, he was tremendously fast. All in all, it was a splendid meeting. I shudder to think what it would have been like in bad weather. August is the French holiday month, and half the places were shut, both restaurants, shops and hotels, and August 15th is a public holiday as well through most of Europe. Eating out was probably the great social problem, though the organizers did give a dinner but in somewhat haphazard fashion with some disgruntled would-be diners walking out. Less said the better. Commemorative plaques, by the way, beautiful and set a very high standard for future events.